You know when you hear on the news that the economy grew by, say, 2%, and you just kind of stop and think, wait, how on earth do they even know that? How do you measure every single thing a country makes and spends? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. We're breaking down a key method called the expenditure method, and it's a really cool way to tell the story of a nation's economy just by looking at its spending. Let's dive in.
I mean, seriously, it sounds impossible, right? How could you possibly keep track of every coffee, every new car, every single transaction in a country of millions? It seems like a total nightmare. But the solution is actually pretty elegant, and it all boils down to one simple but really powerful idea.
Now, this is it. This is the heart of the whole thing. In any economy, you've got this constant circular flow. Whatever is produced generates income for somebody, and that income gets spent on other stuff. Production equals income equals spending. They're all two sides of the same coin. So to figure out how healthy the economy is, we're going to focus on that last part, the total spending. Now, to measure all that spending, we don't try to, count every single dime one by one. That would be insane. Instead, economists group everything into four big major categories. I like to think of them as the four foundational pillars that hold up the entire measurement. So here they are, our four pillars. First, you've got all of us, households, and our spending is called consumption, or just C. Then there's the government, which we'll call G. Next up, you have businesses, and their spending is called investment, or I. And finally, there's our dealings with the rest of the world, which we call net exports, or XM. Okay, so let's look at what's inside each of these pillars. All right, let's start with the absolute biggest pillar of them all, consumption, or C. This is basically all the money that you and I and every other household spend on goods and services. So think about the big stuff, like a new car or a washing machine. Economists call those durable goods. Then there's the everyday stuff, like groceries and clothes. Those are non-durable goods. And of course, it covers all the services we pay for, from getting a haircut to a checkup at the doctor.
Next up is G for government spending. Now, this is a really important distinction. This isn't about things like Social Security checks or welfare benefits. Those are called transfer payments. Nope, this is about the government's direct spending to provide public services for all of us. We're talking about everything from funding the military and being police officers to running public schools and hospitals.
Okay, our third pillar is I for investment. But quick heads up here. This isn't what most people think of as investment, like buying stocks or bonds. In economics, investment is very specific. It's about spending by businesses to build things that will help them produce more in the future. And this pillar is actually made of two pretty different kinds of spending.
So let's break that down. On one hand, you've got gross fixed capital formation. This is the big long-term stuff. A company building a brand new factory, buying a fleet of trucks, or a construction firm putting up a new office building. On the other hand, you have something called change in stock. This is all about inventory. It's the value of all the finished goods sitting in a warehouse or the raw materials waiting to be used.
And that brings us to our fourth and final pillar, which deals with the rest of the world, net exports. It's actually a pretty simple calculation. We take exports, that's the X, which is money foreigners spend on our stuff. And from that, we subtract imports, that's the M, which is money we spend on their stuff. We subtract imports because that money is leaving our economy, right? If the final number is positive, we've got a trade surplus. If it's negative, that's the trade deficit you always hear about.
And here it is, the moment where we put it all together. We take our four pillars, consumption, government spending, investment, and net exports, and we add them all up. C plus G plus I plus X minus M. And that gives us our first big total, gross domestic product at market price, or GDP-MP for short. That market price part is key. It means we're valuing everything at the price you actually pay in the store, which includes things like sales tax.
But hold on, we're not quite finished. GDP is a fantastic measure of a country's production. But to get all the way to what we call national income, we need to make a few smart adjustments. Think of it like we've built the main structure, and now we're adding the finishing touches. Okay, so there are three of these little adjustments. First, we have to go from gross to net. We do this by subtracting something called depreciation. You know how your car loses value every year? Well, a country's factories and machinery wear out too. This accounts for that wear and tear. Second, we go from domestic to national. This just means we add in the income our citizens earn from other countries and subtract what foreign citizens earn here. And finally, we go from market price to factor cost. This is where we take out indirect taxes, like sales tax, and add in any government subsidies. That gets us closer to the true cost of producing everything. This chart maps out the whole journey for us, so let's just chase the path.
We start up top with our GDP at market price. Step 1, we subtract depreciation to go from gross to net, giving us net domestic product. Step 2, we adjust for that income flowing across our borders to go from domestic to national. Now we're at net national product. And the final step, we adjust for taxes and subsidies to get from market price to factor cost. And that leaves us with the final prize, net national product at factor cost, which is just another name for national income.
So to make sure this final number is actually reliable and not just a bunch of random figures, economists have to follow a very strict set of rules. Think of this as the official rulebook for getting an accurate count.
And honestly, these rules are absolutely crucial. Without them, you could get huge errors like counting the same economic activity 2 or 3 times. They're basically the quality control that makes the final number mean anything at all. So let's look at the big do's and don'ts.
Okay, so what are the big rules of the road? First, we only count spending on final goods. So we count the loaf of bread you buy at the store, but we don't count the flour the baker bought to make it. That's the key to avoiding double counting. We also don't count the sale of secondhand goods because their value was already counted way back when they were new. But, and this is a cool detail, we do count the commission a real estate agent makes from selling a used house because that's a new service provided this year. And finally, we leave out purely financial stuff like buying stocks and those government transfer payments we talked about because neither one represents the creation of a new good or service.
So after all that building and all those adjustments, you might be asking, what's the point? Well, what we end up with is so much more than just a number. We get a powerful story about the very character and structure of an entire economy.
This is where that story really comes to life. Just by looking at the size of each of our 4 pillars, you get a snapshot of an economy's personality. So for example, say you see a country where that C for consumption makes up 70% of the pie. That tells you it's a consumer-driven economy. But what if you saw another country where I for investment was a massive 40%? That tells a totally different story, one of a nation that's laser-focused on building factories and infrastructure for the future. This one chart tells you what makes an economy tick.
So at the end of the day, this expenditure method gives us these incredible insights. It shows us what people are actually buying, it helps us pinpoint the real engines of economic growth, and it gives governments a vital tool to help manage the economy, whether they're trying to kickstart growth or cool down inflation.
So let's take one last look at the whole blueprint we just put together. It all starts with those 4 simple pillars of spending, up at the top. They combine to give us that initial GDP number. Then we run it through that series of logical adjustments for depreciation, for foreign income, and for taxes to refine it into our final sophisticated measure, national income. It's a really powerful journey, from simple spending to the economic life of a nation.
So now you have the tools. You can look at that giant number you see on the news and you can deconstruct it. You can see the building blocks, you understand the adjustments, and most importantly, you can start to read the story that it tells. So the next time you see your country's GDP numbers, you'll be able to ask, what story is all that spending really telling us?